are listening to The Common Sense Practical Prepper, sponsored by Duct Tape, the real duct tape. It fixes everything, except bad decisions. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America. From border to border, coast to coast, and all ships at sea, here is your host, Keith.
Hey, all, this is Keith, and you're listening to the Common Sense Practical Prepper podcast for July the 2nd, 2026. So tomorrow starts the long July 4th holiday weekend here in the States. It is 102 degrees here today. Tomorrow and Saturday, 104, and Sunday, a frigid 96 degrees. A lot of people are on the way out of town. Everybody drive safe. Have a nice, safe, and fun 4th of July weekend. So what I want to talk about in this episode, little tongue-in-cheek, but obviously some serious stuff as well. So we talk about self-reliance. Self-reliance is the foundation that this country, the U.S., was built on. And the people who built it, they were preppers, but they didn't call it that. They didn't have a choice. But here's the thing we forget, because we live in a world of grocery stores, same-day delivery, and for the vast majority of American history, being prepared was not optional. It was how you stayed alive. The average colonial family could not run down to the corner market if they ran out of food. There was no store. If you didn't grow it, hunt it, preserve it, or trade for it, you did not eat. Period. There was no 911, no cell phones. If somebody was hurt, you treated them yourself, or you rode for hours to find somebody who could. If your house caught fire, you and your neighbors, if you had neighbors, would put it out. If not, it burned down. There was no fire department coming to help. There was no power grid, no running water, unless it was a creek, no supply chain delivering things to your door. Everything we call prepping, food storage, water procurement, medical knowledge, security, community cooperation, back then was just what they called life. Benjamin Franklin, the OG prepper. If you want a founding father who embodied practical preparedness, look no further than old Ben Franklin. This is the man who said, quote, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail," end quote. That is literally a prepper's motto. And he said it about 250 odd years ago. Benjamin Franklin was obsessed with practical self-improvement. He organized the first volunteer fire company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because there wasn't one, and buildings kept burning down. He didn't wait for the government to solve the problem. He started a fire department. He looked around, identified a vulnerability, and organized his community to fix it. Some of this might sound familiar. He invented the lightning rod, not to get famous, but because lightning kept destroying buildings and killing people, and he figured out there had to be a way to prevent it. That's threat assessment and mitigation. That's also prepping. He started a lending library, a hospital, and a militia. Every single one of those was a response to the same question every prepper asks. What is the gap, and how do I fill that gap? And his most famous quote for these purposes, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." That's the entire philosophy of this podcast in 8 words written by a guy in a powdered wig in 1736. Your homestead was your bug-out location. So think about a colonial homestead and think about how it was organized. Strip away the romantic image and look at it from a functionality standpoint. It was self-contained. They had food production, gardens, livestock, orchards. They had water, a well or a spring. They had fuel, trees that they cut and split themselves. They had security, a rifle over the door, and neighbors who were close enough to hear a gunshot. They preserved food for the winter months because there was no refrigeration, smoking, salting, drying, and root cellaring. That's literally the same thing we do when we build a food storage pantry. Except back in the day, They did not have Mylar bags. They did it with salt in a smokehouse. They made their own soap. They made their own candles. They made their own clothes. They sharpened their own tools. They shod their own horses and built their own furniture. Now, I'm not saying we need to go back to the days of old, but what I am saying is when someone tells you that prepping is extreme or paranoid, remind them that this was the default mode for human existence for nearly the entire American history until about 70 years ago. We are the anomaly, not them. The word militia was not a dirty word. And I'll keep this brief because, as you know, I don't do politics and I'm not starting now. The militia, ordinary citizens who maintain their weapons and train together. This was their primary defense for most of early American history. There was no standing army for most colonists. The security of your community was the responsibility of that same community. It's not a political statement, it's just history, it's just facts. But every man was expected to own a firearm and know how to use it, and respond if they were called upon to defend the community. That's community preparedness at its very basic level. The Founding Fathers understood something that we have largely forgotten today, and that's outsourcing your safety entirely to someone else is a vulnerability, not a luxury. Community was the original mutual aid network. So here's the one thing that gets overlooked in modern prepping culture, which can sometimes skew too far forward, and then you end up with the lone wolf mentality. The founders did not survive alone. Nobody survived alone. Barn raisings, harvest co-ops, shared mills, community watches, lending tools, sharing labor, rotating who kept watch at night in the community. Early American communities were mutual aid networks by necessity. These aren't things that they kind of wanted to do. These were things they had to do to survive. If your neighbor's barn burned down, you helped him rebuild it. Not because you were a saint, but because next month it might be your barn. That's what they called reciprocity. That's the original 2 is 1 and 1 is none, except applied to people, not prepper gear. The lone wolf fantasy is a modern fantasy. The historical reality of American self-reliance was always community-based. You took care of yourself and you took care of your neighbors because that's how everyone survived. I think that's something that the prepping community, including myself, needs to hear more often. Your supplies don't mean much if you've alienated everyone around you. The Founding Fathers knew that. Their survival depended on that. So what we've lost and what we're trying to get back. So here's my point. Somewhere in the last 50 to 70 years, we traded self-reliance for convenience. And that's not entirely a bad thing. I like indoor plumbing. I like refrigeration as much as the next guy. And I'm not really romanticizing about churning my own butter, although I've done that. We outsource our food to grocery stores, water to the utility company, security to the police department, medical care to the hospital, heat to the gas company, and all that works great until it doesn't. Every prepper I know, including myself, is just trying to get a little bit of that self-reliance back. Not all of it. Nobody's trying to go full 1776 here, but enough that when the system hiccups, and it will and it does, you won't be completely helpless. That's not extreme. That's not paranoia. That's the way every single American lived for the first 200 years of this country's existence. So the real spirit of the 4th of July. So this 4th of July, when you're enjoying your cookout and your friends and your cold drinks, take a second to think about what we're actually celebrating. It's not just independence from a king. It's the idea that normal, ordinary people can take care of themselves. They don't need to be managed or provided for. That given freedom and the opportunity, regular folks will figure it out. That someone else has. That's what I believe the founding fathers believed. And that's what every person listening to this podcast is proving. Every time you store an extra case of water, every time you learn a new skill, every time you make a plan instead of hoping that someone else has made a plan. Believe it or not, you are carrying on a proud tradition that's older than this country itself. Happy 4th of July, everybody. Stay safe, stay prepared, and as always, please be careful out there, take care of one another, and until next time.
You've been listening to The Common Sense Practical Prepper. Subscribe, like, drop a review. Over and out.